Hello, hi everyone. Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today we're diving back into our series dedicated to the Bay Area restaurant scene with a shot at what I genuinely consider to be the most difficult thing that I have ever tried to cook, which is the Chinese xiaolongbao, or soup dumpling as they are often more colloquially known. For those who are not familiar, a xiaolongbao is an otherwise unassuming Chinese steamed dumpling with one unique feature, which is that it has a spoonful of soup broth folded into the dumpling. This is achieved with a cartilage-heavy broth called aspic that solidifies into a gelatinous form when it's cooled down. The solid gelatinous broth is then folded into the filling, which is then turned back into a liquid form once the dumpling is steamed for the juiciest dumpling that you will literally ever eat. More specifically, I'll be taking my best shot at what I personally would rate the best xiaolongbao in the Bay Area, which is the one found at Ming's Tasty here in Oakland, California. Now, I want to preface this by saying that as someone who has spent a literal lifetime eating every form of xiaolongbao that you can possibly imagine, ranging from the frozen stuff in grocery stores all the way up to the real deal stuff found at Taiwanese night markets, I don't hand this title out lightly. Not only does their xiaolongbao have a wonderful structural integrity that keeps it from exploding before you can get it onto a spoon, but it also seemingly impossibly has a perfectly thin dough which prevents the xiaolongbao from being too doughy as well. How can this possibly be both? I'm not really sure. In addition to all of this, Ming's Tasty's xiaolongbao is also iconically served with a side of a mysterious red dipping sauce, which, after much investigation, I discovered is not a house blend at all, but just in fact red vinegar, which is unique all on its own too. Okay, so let's get into it.
I got you, moonlight, you're my starlight. I need you all night. Come on, dance with me. I'm levitating you, moonlight, you're my starlight. I need you.
Okay, so diving in here, a xiaolongbao is composed of three different elements, the first being our aspic or soup, the second being our filling, and the third being our wrappers. Now, very important, the order in which we cook these three elements is critical, as you will come to see in a moment. So, I'm starting off with my aspic, which is going to start off looking more or less like a pretty standard stock recipe here. This is 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic going into my pot whole, followed by 1 inch of ginger and 2 medium carrots that I'm giving a quick chop to and tossing in as well. Then next is 3 green onions, which I'm separating just the whites from and tossing this in whole as well. Pretend like this pot isn't already full of water yet. Then getting into the good stuff, this is 4 slices of thick cut bacon. Now, more commonly, you might see this done with pork belly or even just straight up pork fat. If you can get your hands on that, definitely go that route. But this is what I've got on hand though, and I don't think it's gonna make a huge difference since we're just gonna boil this up anyway. Then finally is maybe the most important ingredient in this whole dish, which is about a pound of chicken feet. Now, like our bacon, an aspic can be made from many different kinds of meat scraps, pork or chicken skin being some of the most commonly used, but you can also do this with things like pork rinds, ears, or snouts. What's most important here is that whatever we do use, it needs to have a lot of cartilage in it, because the cartilage is going to release collagen that is going to allow our broth to solidify later on. So we don't want to use things like rib bones or chicken wing scraps here. I'm going with chicken feet because these are pretty easy to source here in Chinatown, but you can definitely get creative with this bit. I'm removing the claws here to help allow the collagen escape during our long cook, and yes, if you are wondering, these do feel super weird. If you ever want to know what a severed hand feels like, get you some chicken feet. Then I'm adding this to my stock pot, filling it up with water and letting this boil for 2 hours. In the meantime, while that's going, we're getting started on our filling next, which for the most part should also look a lot like any of the other dumpling fillings that we've done. This is 8 ounces or half a pound of ground pork going into my mixing bowl here first. Then we're gonna slice up a few aromatics next. These are the reserved greens of my green onions sliced thinly, then followed by 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic going in next, and finally 1 tablespoon or about 1 inch of ginger that's peeled and then finely minced. Then moving on to my wet ingredients, this is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and 1 tablespoon of sesame oil to start, followed by our deeper and more rich umami elements, that's 1 tablespoon each of dark soy sauce and oyster sauce. Then finally, rounding all of this out is half a teaspoon each of white pepper and cornstarch, and then we're setting this aside in the fridge while we move on to our dough. For our dough, we're going with a 2-to-1 ratio of flour to water here. This is 2 cups of AP flour followed by 1 cup of water going into my mixing bowl. Then I'm rounding this out with a pinch of kosher salt and mixing until a cohesive dough forms. Then I'm covering this up and setting it aside to let that gluten rest for 30 minutes, at which point it should look pretty much the same, but relaxed. Then I'm separating my dough here into 24 equal pieces, or about 15 grams each. Mine ended up being 25 pieces, which is weird. Then we're setting this aside on a sheet tray, and what you want to do here before you start rolling these things out is circle back to that aspic broth. Don't try and roll these out right now, because that aspic is going to need at least 8 hours to chill, at which point, if you've already rolled these out, your wrappers will have stuck to each other. Then you'll be left with this sticky, clumpy disaster, and you'll have to redo an hour's worth of rolling. So, setting our dough aside for now, I'm circling back to my stock pot, hopefully 2 hours later at this point, and we should be greeted by the most glorious, fattiest, and juiciest soup base that you have ever seen. I'm pulling this off heat and passing it all through a strainer and some cheesecloth that ultimately did nothing. Then we're removing these scraps, letting it cool down for about 30 minutes, and putting it into the fridge for about 8 hours, or more ideally overnight. Then the next morning, I'm pulling this back out of my fridge, and lo and behold, we have some solidified soup, which by the way is freaking crazy, and if this doesn't fascinate you, then you're crazy too, because we literally just made gelatin. Anyway, you'll notice that overnight our fats have separated from our soup base, so I'm just using a spoon here to scrape this bit off and then slicing this up into probably what should be smaller squares than what I'm doing. You'll see why in a sec. And then I'm using a spatula to remove this from my container. Revel in this glorious, mind-bending food science wonder that you have just created one more time before adding it to the cutting board and giving it a rough chop. At this point, you'll notice it probably would have benefited if we sliced these smaller in that container to make this part easier, but oh well. Once our aspic is nice and chopped up, I'm adding it to my filling mixture, and we're giving it one more toss to combine before setting it back into the fridge while we get to work on our wrappers. Okay, so finally circling back to our dough here, I'm starting off by rolling these into even balls between the palms of my hands, and then flattening it out on my cutting board and rolling it out with a quarter turn after each roll until our wrappers are about 2 inches in diameter. Then I'm adding about half a tablespoon of filling to the center and folding it shut with pleats. Now, I know my grandma said that it's supposed to be 18 pleats exactly, but I mean, come on. Then I personally like to leave the top open to let the soup escape from here, but you can also pinch this bit shut if you're worried about it spilling out. I'm repeating this 23 more times. Here's a slightly prettier one that I made towards the end as I got better at folding these things. Then I'm getting out my bamboo steam baskets here, or you can just use a plain old metal steam basket too if that's what you've got. Now, more commonly you'll probably see this done with cabbage, but I actually prefer leafy romaine though, because it's not quite as rigid and makes for a more even surface for the dumplings to sit on, but use what you've got though. Either way, the purpose here is that our leafy greens are going to prevent the dumplings from sticking to the basket, sort of like a natural parchment paper, except you can't eat parchment paper if it sticks to your dumplings. Over on the stove, I've got a pot of water at a simmer, then I'm placing my steam baskets on top, letting this steam for 8 minutes, and revel in the most glorious reveal shot that we've had in a while. Anyway, finally, I'm serving this up with the Ming's Tasty signature side of red vinegar, and we're ready to eat. Okay, so I'll be honest, this is one that I've been putting off basically since we started this channel because I knew it would be a very challenging dumpling to make, and if you are looking for something that's maybe a little bit more approachable and easier to do, definitely check out our shumai recipe that we did a few weeks ago, which is what I refer to as dumplings for dummies. If you are up for the challenge though, this was a really fun one for me to dive into and just sort of explore how to make a dumpling that I've been eating for pretty much my entire life. The xiaolongbao is a super classic and iconic part of Chinese dim sum cuisine, and in my opinion, is sort of like the filet mignon of dumplings. I don't necessarily think that these came out perfectly. I did think that those wrappers could have been a little bit thinner, but I also know that this is a dish that many restaurants spend literal lifetimes perfecting, so I'm still pretty happy with how these turned out. The filling is tender and flavorful, the soup is deeply rich and savory, and maybe most importantly, of all 24 of the dumplings that I made, only one of the wrappers broke, which all count as a win. If you're looking for a challenging dumpling to take a shot at and you've got some time on your hands, this is a great one to try out. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you give this one a shot. For those who are new to the channel, this one is part of a larger series that we've been doing that's dedicated to reproducing foods from the Bay Area restaurant scene. So definitely check out that series next if you haven't yet, because there's a lot of these. For the Bay Area locals, this is also the second dish that we've done from the Ming's Tasty menu. They're located in Oakland, Chinatown, so if you're in the area, definitely check them out too. And lastly, if you're here in the East Bay, the Wu Can Cook Fried Rice pop-up is back at the Hayward Farmers Market this coming Saturday, so come by and say hi if you can. More about that at wucancook.com/eats. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, be nice people, and I'll see you soon.